By week's end, Angel's Rest carried my name like a burr in its teeth. Wherever Ransom drove, whispers followed. I heard them at the mercantile, the blacksmith's yard, even the pump where women scrubbed shirts and pretended not to look. Poor little stray, that man's got no sense. I kept my eyes on my hands. If I focused on sweeping, stacking wood, stirring batter, the talk slid off. Mostly the Burks found us after church. Mr. Burke's mustache sat tidy as a fence. Mrs. Burke smiled like a photograph. We could take the girl, she said. Proper. Bed, proper schooling. We got papers from Cheyenne. The word papers hung heavy. Ransom let the offer sit in the dust. I felt myself shrinking, wishing I could be small enough to slip into Mama's boots and disappear. I can be real quiet, I said, so low only he would hear. That afternoon the sheriff rode up, hat low, horse damp. Counsel's called a hearing, he told Ransom. Burks filed. Folks are stirred. Wouldn't look good, you alone with a girl that ain't kin. Ransom didn't argue. When? Week from Wednesday. Chapel. After he left, Ransom went to the barn and hauled out boards, planed smooth, edges true. The crate of nails from the station, open with a small, satisfying cry. He measured the space past his bed with twine, marked the floor with his thumbnail, and let the hammer do the talking. What are you doing? I asked, though my heart had already leapt to the answer. Making you a room. He held a board level and drove a nail true. He set a frame, then another, lifting a wall the way a man might lift a prayer and hope it holds. Sawdust drifted like summer snow. Something inside my ribs pressed outward, a careful bloom. I fetched water, held boards when he nodded, passed nails into his palm one by one, the small click between us, like a language dot by lantern light, the room took shape, a narrow doorway, a small window to catch morning. He hung a curtain on a bent nail. Door come later, he said, like doors were luxuries. When the wall stood, Ransom reached for my drawing, the rabbit, the bench, Mama's boots, and pinned it to the new wood with a tack. It looked lonely there, so I added another. A square house with a crooked porch and a small figure at the window. You want the room? He asked. I don't want to be trouble. You're not, he said, quiet as water in a cup. You're a person. The word landed like a coat across my shoulders. I set Mama's boots beneath the window. Outside, wind worried the oak. Inside, the walls held the talk didn't stop. If anything, it sharpened Mrs. Patch, bringing day-old bread with her mouth set tight, the smith's boy asking if I'd be back when the Burks fetched me. But when darkness fell and the lamp stained the new boards gold, I felt claimed in a way papers couldn't prove. Ransom stood in the doorway a long time that first night, hat in his hands as if there were a prayer he might say but didn't know. Finally he tapped the tack in my drawing a little deeper. Sleep. I'll be real quiet, I whispered. He shook his head once. You ain't got to be. Toward evening a man came up the road with a wagon that rattled. Tall as a fence post, straight and weathered, his shadow reached the bench before he did. He studied the tower, the rails, the sky, as if measuring what was broken and what might be mended. Then his eyes slid to me, quiet, steady, the color of iron. He set down a crate. Nails winked like dull coins. His hands were nicked and flattened. The careful way he moved said he preferred wood to people. He nodded once. I nodded back. We stayed. Like that, a breath, not scaring each other off. You eaten? He asked, voice rough as rope. I shook my head. He unwrapped a brown paper parcel. Bread and ham breathed out, simple and kind. He held it toward me without stepping close. I didn't move at first. Since morning I'd learned anything offered might be snatched away. The sheriff had offered a claim. The ladies had offered glances, gifts that vanished on touching. It's just a sandwich, he said. Name's Ransom Holt. I took it. The bread was dry at the edges, soft in the middle. The first bite scraped. The second put out the little fire in me. He watched without staring, like he knew hunger wants to. Be private. When I finished, he gave me the paper for crumbs and a tin canteen. I drank, and I didn't thank him. Not for lack of gratitude. Thanks felt like letting go of something I might still need. He tipped his hat to leave. I spoke before fear could. Shut me up. Can I spend a day with you? He went still. The horses stamped and jingled, wanting a decision. Wind pushed dust in a circle at our feet, drawing a line none of us had asked for. A day, he said. That's what the conductor promised, I told him. Someone would come. He didn't say who. I reckon a day's a thing I can ask for. He looked toward town where roofs bunched like wary cattle, then at the bench, at the mark my body had pressed into the boards, at my mama's boots and the rabbit with no face. His jaw worked on a hard thought. He didn't look like the rescuing kind. He looked like the kind who fixed what he could reach and left the rest to stand in its weather. All right, he said at last. He didn't offer a hand. I didn't need one. I looped the boot laces over my shoulder and climbed onto the wagon, settling on the crate of nails. It smelled of sap and iron. He flicked the reins. Angel's Rest slid backward, the bench and tower shrinking to shapes in the plain. We didn't talk much. He said his place was a little ways out, barn, porch, one room, no company. I said my name was Hetty May, and my mama's was Mabel. I didn't say the rest. He didn't ask. The road unrolled, frayed at the edges. Coyotes started in the gullies. The sky bruised purple over low hills between the last fence post and the first mesquite. My fear eased like a fist forgetting it's clenched. The crate hummed with the ruts. I pressed the cloth rabbit to my ribs and tried to memorize the sound of a wagon that did not pass me by. Ransom cleared his throat. Day's a fair measure, he said. We'll take the measure and see. It promised nothing and took nothing away. For the first time since morning, that felt like enough. Ransom Holt's ranch came into view as a shape of stubbornness against the dusk. A barn sagged at one corner, patched with mismatched planks. The porch of the house slanted, 2 steps missing from its short stair. Chickens scattered in the yard, scrappy and sharp-eyed, as though they, too, had grown used to keeping watch for themselves. A single oak leaned over the place, its branches twisted by years of wind. This it? I asked, though I already knew it was. The house looked like him, solid, tired, with no frills left. He grunted and pulled the wagon up inside. The air smelled of wood smoke and oil. The one-room house held a small iron stove, a rough-hewn table, and 2 chairs except one chair had no back, just a stump of wood, as if it had lost too much and kept going anyway. The walls were bare save for a single hook with his hat. No pictures, no scraps of lace, no softness anywhere. Still, I found myself moving as though I belonged. My bare feet scuffed across the floorboards, and I asked if I could feed the chickens. Ransom blinked at me like I'd spoken Apache, but he fetched a tin scoop and pointed to a sack. I scattered grain, the hens clucking around me as if I were something familiar. At supper, he sliced beans and cornbread, laying out 2 plates with the stiffness of a man who hadn't done so in a long while. He didn't talk. Neither did I, but when the plates emptied, I pushed mine toward him and said, "Thank you." The word left me raw, like skin rubbed too thin. He only nodded, eyes on the stove. Later, I drew on butcher paper I found rolled by the wall. A stub of pencil scratched shapes, my rabbit, the station bench, Mama's boots. I taped it to the wall with twine. The house looked less empty for it. The next morning the sheriff came, Mrs. Patch trailing him like a storm cloud. They stood in the doorway, stiff with righteousness. "You can't just keep her," Mrs. Patch said, hand over her mouth like my presence might be contagious. "A grown man alone with a stray girl, it'll cause talk." "I ain't stray," I whispered, though my lips trembled. "Talk's already started," the sheriff muttered. "Town won't like it, Holt. Burks been asking if they might take her in." Ransom leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at them either. He stared at some invisible place on the horizon, jaw tight, Mrs. Patch's eyes flicked to me, hard but not cruel. Best if you came with us, child. You'll be fed proper. I held my rabbit tighter. My lip quivered, but I pressed it behind my teeth. Then I said the only thing I could think to bargain with. I'll be real quiet. Silence stretched. The sheriff coughed. Finally, Ransom shifted his weight and answered, She stay tonight. Mrs. Patch bristled. That ain't wise. Not a skin advice. His voice was calm, iron-heavy. They left, boots crunching on the dust. The chickens stirred, restless. I stood there, still trembling. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Ransom bent, picked up the drawing I'd made when it slipped from the wall, and pinned it back in place. That night, lying on the cot with Mama's boots at my feet, I thought maybe quiet could be enough. Maybe it could be the start of something more. By week's end, Angel's Rest carried my name like a burr in its teeth. Wherever Ransom drove, whispers followed. I heard them at the mercantile, the blacksmith's yard, even the pump where women scrubbed shirts and pretended not to look. Poor little stray, that man's got no sense. I kept my eyes on my hands. If I focused on sweeping, stacking wood, stirring batter, the talk slid off. Mostly the Burks found us after church. Mr. Burks' mustache sat tidy as a fence. Mrs. Burke smiled like a photograph. We could take the girl, she said. Proper. Bed, proper schooling. We got papers from Cheyenne. The word papers hung heavy. Ransom let the offer sit in the dust. I felt myself shrinking, wishing I could be small enough to slip into Mama's boots and disappear. I can be real quiet, I said, so low only he would hear. That afternoon the sheriff rode up, hat low, horse damp. Counsel's called a hearing, he told Ransom. Burks filed. Folks are stirred. Wouldn't look good, you alone with a girl that ain't kin. Ransom didn't argue. When? Week from Wednesday. Chapel. After he left, Ransom went to the barn and hauled out boards, planed smooth, edges true. The crate of nails from the station, open with a small, satisfying cry. He measured the space past his bed with twine, marked the floor with his thumbnail, and let the hammer do the talking. What are you doing? I asked, though my heart had already leapt to the answer. Making you a room. He held a board level and drove a nail true. He set a frame, then another, lifting a wall the way a man might lift a prayer and hope it holds. Sawdust drifted like summer snow. Something inside my ribs pressed outward, a careful bloom. I fetched water, held boards when he nodded, passed nails into his palm one by one, the small click between us, like a language by lantern light, the room took shape, a narrow doorway, a small window to catch morning. He hung a curtain on a bent nail. Door come later, he said, like doors were luxuries. When the wall stood, Ransom reached for my drawing, the rabbit, the bench, Mama's boots, and pinned it to the new wood with a tack. It looked lonely there, so I added another. A square house with a crooked porch and a small figure at the window. You want the room? He asked. I don't want to be trouble. You're not, he said, quiet as water in a cup. You're a person. The word landed like a coat across my shoulders. I set Mama's boots beneath the window. Outside, wind worried the oak. Inside, the walls held the talk didn't stop. If anything, it sharpened Mrs. Patch, bringing day-old bread with her mouth set tight, the smith's boy asking if I'd be back when the Burks fetched me. But when darkness fell and the lamp stained the new boards gold, I felt claimed in a way papers couldn't prove. Ransom stood in the doorway a long time that first night, hat in his hands as if there were a prayer he might say but didn't know. Finally he tapped the tack in my drawing a little deeper. Sleep. I'll be real quiet, I whispered. He shook his head once. You ain't got to be. When Wednesday came, the sun dragged me awake too early, nervous light crawling across my cot. I lay still, listening to the rooster, to Ransom splitting kindling outside, to the silence between. That silence pressed heavier than any noise in town. Schoolhouse, he said at breakfast. as though it were a chore no different from hauling water. My stomach knotted around cornbread. The school stood at the far edge of Angel's Rest, a square wooden box with windows clouded by children's breath. Inside, the air smelled of chalk and coal smoke. Benches were full. When we stepped in, the room stilled. Girls in braids turned. Boys stopped whispering. Their eyes were on me, the stray and Ransom Holt's shadow. The teacher, Miss Carroll, sat, her jaw tight before softening it. "Can you write your name, child?" I wanted to fold into my dress. Instead, I looked at Ransom. His nod was small, but it steadied me. Miss Carroll laid out a slate. My fingers trembled around the stub of chalk. The first letter wobbled. The second broke halfway, leaving dust across my hand. I pressed harder, teeth gritted, and scratched each line until the shape was clear enough to read. Hetty May. For a moment the world held its breath. Then a boy snorted. A girl hissed, "She can write." A few adults who had gathered at the back Mrs. Patch among them exchanged glances, some surprised, some skeptical. Miss Carroll nodded once as if I'd met a measure she hadn't expected. That'll do. I exhaled like I'd been underwater. My knees nearly buckled, but Ransom's hand found my shoulder, firm and brief. It said more than words. Outside, the Burks waited. "She'll need more than scratches on a slate," Mr. Burke said. "She'll need a proper name, a proper life." "Seem..." "To me," Ransom replied, "she just gave herself one." His voice wasn't raised, but it carried. Townsfolk lingered, watching. A few nodded. Most didn't. I kept my eyes on the dirt until the crowd thinned. That night, by lamplight, I whispered, "Do I have a last name yet?" Ransom sat at the table, turning his cup slow. His face was unreadable, but I saw the ache in his eyes. "Not yet," he said. "I traced the edge of my rabbit's ear, smoothed flat, long ago. Maybe one day." He didn't answer, but when I turned to my little room, I saw he'd tacked up another scrap of butcher paper. Blank, waiting, I stared at it until my eyes blurred. In that blankness was something larger than a named room for belonging, for claiming. For now it was enough to know he hadn't walked me to the Burks' door. In bed, I whispered the letters under my breath, Hetty May, until sleep caught me. Each time I said them, they felt heavier, realer, as though speaking them stitched me closer to the world. For the first time since Mama's boots were tied to my shoulder, I didn't feel invisible. I felt like a person who might stay. The Burks came on a Sunday, yard smelling of soap and hay, the town rich with spare opinions. Mr. Burke rode upright, reins like a ledger line. Mrs. Burke sat side-saddle in a dress too clean for dust. The sheriff trailed them, brim low like he'd rather be elsewhere. I snapped beans on the porch. Ransom mended a harness, leather over his knee. He set the awl down, stood. "Afternoon, Holt," Mr. Burke said. "Afternoon, child." Mrs. Burke unfolded a paper like scripture. "Cheyenne Agency's approval," she said. "Stable home, respectable marriage, proper prospects. We can take Hetty today." Ransom didn't touch it. "She asked for a day," he said. "I gave her one. Been measuring since." The sheriff cleared his throat. Counsel set a hearing. The Burks are standing. Folks are talking. "They've been talking since God made mouths," Ransom said. He looked at me. "Not them. Hetty." The rabbit slid. I caught it like I might drop myself. A voice in me tried to crawl underground. I felt their niceness leaning toward me like a pen, reaching to sign my life. Mrs. Burke sweetened her tone. "A real bed, dear. White curtains. A doll with a painted face. Clean dresses. School every day. No more sweeping barns." I thought of the small room Ransom built with careful hands, the drawing he'd tacked up, the hammer that first night like a heart learning again. "I sweep because I live here," I said, surprising myself with its steadiness. Mr. Burke's jaw twitched. "No one's accusing Holt of bad intent. But propriety matters. We're offering what's best." Ransom kept his eyes on mine. He didn't put words in my mouth. He stood like the oak, as if to say the wind could blow and we'd still stand, Hetty? The sheriff asked. Gentle Dot. My voice came out small and bright, like a struck bell. I want to stay. Silence stirred the dust. A chicken hopped from the rail like it had been waiting. Child, Mrs. Burks said, you don't always know what's best. I know where I wake without fear. Mr. Burke folded the paper, tucking away a stubborn idea. We'll pursue this properly. Already are, Ransom said. He stepped forward beside me, shoulder to shoulder. You heard her. The sheriff tipped his hat, apology tucked in the gesture. Hearings Wednesday, chapel. Be ready to speak. When they rode off, the yard felt larger, like a breath let go. I didn't know I was shaking until Ransom set the bean basket on the table, poured some, and snapped at my pace, the crack of each seam a comfort. You did right, he said. I was scared. Me too. He said it plain as a plank cut square. They had papers, I whispered. Papers can say a thing, he said. So can a person. What if the council listens to the wrong kind? He looked toward the little room. Then we'll keep building, till the walls make sense to more than use. I breathed. The sun dropped, laying bars of shadow across the porch. His hand kept time with the beans. In my room, the drawing waited like a light left burning for someone's return. I realized it was burning for mine. Wednesday would come more papers, more talk. But that Sunday afternoon, all the belonging I had sat between us in a bowl, green and enough. The morning after the Burks rode off, Ransom hitched the wagon without a word. I climbed in, rabbit tucked close, boots knocking against the crate. He steered us toward the rise beyond the creek, where the grass leaned low and thin. At the top, the wagon stopped. There, beneath a cedar, lay a grave with no stone, just a cross made of 2 boards, weather-grayed, edges splintering. The name Mabel Holt was carved shallow but sure. Ransom stood beside it, hat in hand, silence spilling. From him, his jaw worked like he was chewing on memory too tough to swallow. She was my wife, he said. Long time gone now. House been quiet since. I slid down from the wagon. My knees bent into the dust as I touched the wood. I thought of Mama in the baggage car, of her boots hanging heavy on my shoulder. Loss knew loss. I reached into my pocket and set down a marble green glass, scratched from play. She ain't replaced, I whispered, but I'm here. Ransom's eyes flicked to me, something soft breaking through the hard lines. He cleared his throat, nodded once. By the time we rattled back into town, word had already spread of the Burks petition. Some folks eyed us sharp, others softer. Mrs. Patch pressed a parcel into my hands, 2 dresses, mended neat. Old Mr. Dougherty slipped me a stick of candy, winked. Not all of them were against us. Still, gossip moved like smoke. Holt's taken leave of sense. Girls got no right. Every kindness was met with whispers behind hands. That night, in the glow of the lamp, I traced letters on butcher paper. Hetty May, I wrote, steady as I could. Then I paused. Do I get a middle name? I asked. Ransom leaned back, pipe cold between his teeth. His eyes held something I hadn't seen. Fear, maybe, or the weight of choosing. Finally, he said, Hope. The word settled like a quilt across my shoulders. Hetty May Hope, I repeated, whispering it to the paper, to the boards, to the small room that now felt more mine than any place on earth. I pinned the paper to the wall, the letters uneven but proud. My rabbit sat beneath it, Mama's boots, lined straight. That night I lay down with the name still on my lips. Hetty May Hope, not a burden, not a stray. A person with something stitched inside her that might last. I'm not a hole to be filled. I choose home. The preacher said, Hetty May Holt, you can stay. His hand found mine. This is the final part.